The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the dusty station in El Paso, Texas, and Patrick Kane knew immediately that something was wrong with his mail-order bride. Through the window, he could see a young woman slumped against the wooden seat, her face pale as milk, her lips tinged with an unhealthy gray color that made his stomach clench with worry. He had expected nerves, perhaps shyness, but not this ghostly apparition that barely seemed conscious as the driver opened the door. It was June of 1878, and the summer heat pressed down on the town like a heavy blanket, making the dust dance in shimmering waves above the packed earth of the main street. Patrick had spent the last 3 months corresponding with Eleanor Winters through a matrimonial agency in Boston, and her letters had painted a picture of a vibrant, educated woman seeking adventure in the West. The woman who practically fell into his arms when he helped her down from the coach bore little resemblance to the confident penmanship he had memorized. "Easy now," Patrick said softly, catching her weight as her legs buckled beneath her long traveling dress. She was lighter than he expected, and up close he could see the dark circles beneath her closed eyes, the way her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. "Miss Winters, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing hazel eyes that struggled to focus on his face. "Mr. Kane." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and strained. "I apologize. The journey, it was so rough. The stagecoach, the swaying, I could not keep anything down for days." Patrick felt a surge of protective concern that surprised him with its intensity. He had told himself this arrangement was practical, nothing more. He needed a wife to help run his ranch, and she needed a new life away from whatever circumstances had driven a well-spoken woman like her to answer a stranger's advertisement. Love was not part of the bargain, yet holding her fragile form against his chest stirred something he had not anticipated. "Do not worry about that now," he said, adjusting his grip to support her more securely. She smelled of sickness and travel dust, but beneath that he caught a hint of lavender. "Let me get you somewhere you can rest." The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Tom who had been running the El Paso route for 15 years, shook his head sympathetically as he hauled down a worn leather trunk. "Poor thing has been sick since we left San Antonio 3 days ago. Could not keep down water, let alone food. I have seen folks get coach sick before, but she has it worse than most." Patrick nodded his thanks and half carried Eleanor across the street toward the boarding house run by Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had settled in El Paso after her husband died building the railroad. The townsfolk stared openly as they passed, and Patrick could already hear the whispers starting. Small towns thrived on gossip, and the arrival of his mail-order bride would be dinner conversation for weeks. Mrs. Chen took one look at Eleanor and immediately switched into her practical, no-nonsense mode. "Upstairs, second door on the left. I will bring water and broth. That girl needs rest and fluids, or she will not make it through the night." The bluntness of the statement made Patrick's heart hammer in his chest. He carried Eleanor up the narrow staircase, careful not to bump her against the walls, and laid her gently on the clean white sheets of the boarding house bed. She moaned softly, one hand moving to her stomach. "I am so sorry," she whispered again, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "This is not how I imagined our meeting. You must think me terribly weak." Patrick pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, studying her face properly for the first time. Even pale and sickly, she was lovely, with delicate features and thick brown hair that had mostly escaped its pins during the rough journey. Her letters had not included a photograph, so he had tried not to build expectations, but seeing her now, he felt a strange flutter of hope mixed with the worry. I think you are exhausted and ill from a hard journey, he said firmly. Nothing more than that. Rest now. We can talk when you are feeling better. Mrs. Chen arrived with a pitcher of cool water and a basin, along with some clean cloths. You know how to tend someone with coach sickness? She asked Patrick, one eyebrow raised. I have nursed sick cattle and horses, Patrick replied with a slight smile. I reckon the principle is similar. Keep them hydrated, keep them comfortable, wait for it to pass. Cattle do not require the same delicacy, Mrs. Chen said dryly, but there was approval in her dark eyes. Clean her face with cool water, try to get her to take small sips every few minutes. If she can keep down water for a few hours, we will try broth. I will check back in an hour. After Mrs. Chen left, Patrick wrung out one of the cloths and gently wiped Eleanor's face. She sighed at the touch of the cool water, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Her eyes opened again, more alert this time, and she studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. You look different than I imagined, she said softly. Better or worse? Patrick asked, surprised to find he cared about the answer. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Different. Your letters were so serious, so formal. I expected someone older, perhaps stern, but you have kind eyes. Patrick felt heat rise in his cheeks, and he focused on dipping the cloth in the water again. He was 26 years old, and he had been running his ranch alone for 3 years since his father died. The work had hardened his body and weathered his face, but he supposed he was still young enough not to look ancient. Eleanor, he knew from her letters, was 23, old enough that her family back in Massachusetts had started to pressure her about marriage to men she described as suffocatingly boring. Try to take a sip of water, he said, lifting her head gently and bringing the tin cup to her lips. She managed a small swallow before turning her head away, her face going even paler. It hurts, she whispered. My stomach feels like it is on fire. I know, but you need to try, just a little at a time. They fell into a rhythm over the next few hours. Patrick would coax her to take small sips of water, then wipe her face and neck with the cool cloth, then sit quietly while she dozed fitfully. Mrs. Chen came and went, bringing fresh water and eventually a mild broth that Eleanor managed to keep down for almost 20 minutes before losing it again. As evening fell and the sun painted the sky outside the window in shades of orange and red, Eleanor seemed to rally slightly. She stayed awake longer, her eyes following Patrick as he moved around the room, and eventually she spoke again. Tell me about your ranch, she said. Your letters mentioned cattle and horses, but not much else. What will my life be like there? Patrick settled back in the chair, grateful for something to talk about besides her illness. It is not a large operation, not like some of the spreads further north. I have about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, some chickens and pigs. The house is modest, 2 bedrooms and a main room with the kitchen. I built most of it myself after my father passed. You have help, ranch hands. I have 2 men who work for me, Miguel and his son Carlos. They are good workers, honest. Miguel's wife Maria sometimes helps with cooking and washing when I need it, but mostly I have been managing on my own. It is one of the reasons He trailed off, suddenly awkward. One of the reasons you needed a wife, Eleanor finished for him, her voice soft but not accusatory. You were honest about that in your letters. I appreciated it. My aunt kept trying to match me with her minister, a man 40 years my senior who wanted a nurse for his declining years, not a true wife. At least you were forthright about your needs. Patrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It started as a practical matter, he admitted. The ranch needs someone to help manage the household side of things, and I was tired of eating my own poor cooking. But reading your letters, learning about you, it became more than that. I found myself looking forward to each one, wondering what you would say, how you would describe the things you saw in Boston. You made me want to read books again, to think about things beyond cattle prices and fence repairs. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I felt the same way. Your letters were like windows into a completely different world. You wrote about sunsets over the desert, about breaking horses and tracking strays through the canyons. It all sounded so alive, so real, compared to the suffocating parlor rooms and social calls that filled my days. "Do you have regrets?" Patrick asked quietly. "About coming here, I mean. This is not what you expected." "The coach sickness is not what I expected," Eleanor said with a weak smile. "But you are exactly what I hoped for, someone genuine. Someone who sees me as more than a decorative object to be displayed at dinners and church services." Before Patrick could respond, Eleanor's face went pale again and she turned to the side, retching into the basin he quickly provided. He held her hair back gently, murmuring soothing words until the spasm passed. She collapsed back onto the pillow, exhausted and trembling. "I hate this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I want to be strong. I want to be the capable woman I promised I would be in my letters. Instead, I am weak and useless." "You are neither weak nor useless," Patrick said firmly, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were cold and clammy, but they gripped his with surprising strength. "You traveled over 1,000 miles to start a new life with a stranger. That takes more courage than most people ever manage. The coach sickness will pass. This will pass." She squeezed his hand tighter. "Will you stay? I know it is not proper, but I do not want to be alone." Patrick glanced at the window where twilight was deepening into night. He should go back to his ranch, check on the animals, sleep in his own bed. But the thought of leaving Eleanor alone in this strange room, sick and frightened, made his chest ache. "I will stay," he said. "Mrs. Chen can bring me a blanket. I will sleep in the chair." Relief flooded Eleanor's face and she finally seemed to relax into the pillows. "Thank you, Patrick. May I call you Patrick?" "Of course. And I will call you Eleanor if that suits you." "It suits me fine," she murmured, her eyes already drifting closed. "Much better than Miss Winters." Patrick kept watch through the night, dozing occasionally in the chair but waking at every sound Eleanor made. He coaxed her to drink water whenever she stirred, and by the early hours of the morning, she seemed to be keeping it down more reliably. Mrs. Chen checked on them at dawn, bringing fresh bread and coffee for Patrick and more broth for Eleanor. "She looks better," Mrs. Chen observed, pressing a practiced hand to Eleanor's forehead. "The color is coming back." Another day or two of rest, and she should be strong enough to travel to your ranch. Over the next 2 days, Patrick rarely left Eleanor's side. He sent word to Miguel that he would be delayed, and he focused all his attention on helping Eleanor recover. They talked for hours when she felt well enough, sharing stories from their childhoods, discussing books they had both read, debating everything from politics to religion to the best way to make bread. Patrick learned that Eleanor had lost her mother when she was 12, and her father had remarried a woman who saw Eleanor as competition for her own daughter's prospects. The letters from the matrimonial agency had been hidden in Eleanor's room like treasures, a secret hope for escape that she barely dared to believe might come true. Eleanor learned that Patrick's mother had died giving birth to a stillborn sister when he was 10, leaving just Patrick and his father to run the ranch. His father had been a hard man, quick with a strap and slow with praise, but he had taught Patrick everything about ranching before a riding accident took his life 3 years ago. "I was angry at him for a long time," Patrick admitted on the second evening, as they shared a simple dinner of bread and stew that Eleanor could finally keep down. "Angry that he never told me he was proud of me, never showed any warmth." But after he died, I found a box under his bed with every letter I had ever sent him when I was away learning ranching from my uncle. He had kept them all, tied with string. I think he loved me in his way. He just did not know how to show it. Eleanor reached across the small table and squeezed his hand. That must have been lonely, growing up like that. My father was distant too, but at least my mother was warm before she passed. I had 12 years of love to sustain me through the cold years after. Maybe that is why we understand each other, Patrick said, marveling at how natural it felt to sit here with her, sharing these private truths. We both know what it is like to feel alone in a crowded room. By the third day, Eleanor was well enough to walk around the room, though she still tired easily. Her color had returned to normal, and her eyes had regained their brightness. Patrick found himself staring at her more often, noticing little things like the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, or how her whole face lit up when she smiled. "I think I am ready to see your ranch," Eleanor announced that afternoon, after successfully eating a full meal. "I am tired of being an invalid. I want to start my new life." Patrick felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The boarding house had been a kind of sanctuary, a place where they could get to know each other without the pressures of daily ranch life. But he knew she was right. It was time to move forward. "We will leave in the morning," he decided. "I will rent a wagon so you can ride lying down if you need to. It is only about an hour's ride, but I do not want to tax your strength." Eleanor smiled at him with such warmth that Patrick felt his heart skip. "You have been so kind to me, Patrick, more than I had any right to expect. I know this was supposed to be a practical arrangement, but I want you to know that I am grateful. Whatever happens between us, I will always be grateful for these past few days." Patrick wanted to tell her that gratitude was not what he was feeling, that somewhere between the coach station and this moment. His practical arrangement had transformed into something that felt dangerously close to the beginnings of love. But the words stuck in his throat, and he simply nodded, hoping she could see some of what he felt in his eyes. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sky that brilliant blue that only appeared in the desert. Patrick brought the wagon around to the front of the boarding house, and Miguel and Carlos arrived to load Eleanor's trunk. Mrs. Chen insisted on packing a basket of food for the journey, along with stern instructions about rest and plenty of fluids. "You take care of her, Mrs. Chen told Patrick, poking him in the chest with one finger. "She is a good woman. You are lucky she answered your advertisement." "I know," Patrick said sincerely. "I will take care of her, I promise." Eleanor emerged wearing a fresh dress that she had finally had the strength to change into, her hair properly pinned up, looking almost like a different person from the sick woman he had carried up the stairs 3 days ago. She hugged Mrs. Chen goodbye, promising to visit soon, and then let Patrick help her up onto the wagon seat. The ride out to the ranch took them through the outskirts of El Paso, and then into the open desert country that Patrick loved. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, with rocky hills rising in the distance and hardy vegetation clinging to life despite the heat. Eleanor sat up straight, taking in everything with wide eyes. "It is so big," she breathed. "So open." In Boston, everything felt closed in, buildings crowding against each other. Here you can see forever. "Wait until you see the sunset from the porch," Patrick said, pleased by her reaction. "That is when the desert really shows off." The ranch house came into view after they crossed a shallow creek lined with cottonwood trees. It was a simple structure, built of adobe and wood, with a wide porch across the front and a barn and corrals nearby. To Eleanor, who had grown up in cramped city housing, it probably looked rustic and primitive. Patrick found himself holding his breath, waiting for her reaction. "It is perfect," Eleanor said softly, and Patrick saw that she meant it. It looked solid, safe, like a real home. Patrick helped her down from the wagon, and Miguel and Carlos approached to be introduced. Miguel was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, and Carlos was 19, tall and lanky with his father's smile. They both removed their hats and greeted Eleanor with respectful courtesy. "Welcome, Miss Winters," Miguel said in slightly accented English. "We are very happy that Patrick will have someone to share the ranch with. He works too hard alone." Eleanor shook both their hands, seemingly unbothered by the breach of formal etiquette. "Please call me Eleanor. And I hope you will teach me everything I need to know about ranch life. I have much to learn." Carlos grinned at that, his shyness evaporating. "I can teach you about the horses. We have a new foal that was born last week. She is very sweet." They spent the next hour showing Eleanor around the property. Patrick watched her take in everything with eager curiosity, asking questions about the cattle, the garden that Maria tended, the chickens that scratched in the yard. She exclaimed over the foal, letting it nuzzle her hand with its soft nose, and she laughed at the antics of the ranch dogs who came running to investigate the newcomer. When they finally entered the house, Patrick saw it through Eleanor's eyes and felt a wave of embarrassment. It was clean because Maria had helped him prepare for Eleanor's arrival, but it was spare and masculine, lacking any kind of decoration or comfort beyond the basic necessities. "I know it is not much," Patrick started, but Eleanor cut him off. "It is wonderful," she said firmly. "I can already imagine making curtains for the windows, maybe some cushions for the chairs. Oh, and that corner would be perfect for a bookshelf. You do still have those books you mentioned in your letters." Patrick felt relief wash over him. "In my bedroom in a trunk. I did not have anywhere proper to display them." Eleanor turned to look at him, her expression suddenly serious. "Patrick, we should discuss the sleeping arrangements. I know we are engaged to be married, but given that we have only just met in person, I think it would be proper for me to take the second bedroom until after the wedding, if that is acceptable to you." Patrick had been wondering how to bring up this exact topic, grateful that Eleanor had the courage to address it directly. "That is more than acceptable. I want you to feel comfortable here, Eleanor. We will marry when you are ready, not before." Her shoulders relaxed, and he realized she had been bracing for an argument. "Thank you. I know some men would have different expectations, but I am glad you are not one of them." They settled into an easy routine over the following weeks. Eleanor took over the household duties with enthusiasm, throwing herself into cooking, cleaning, and learning all the domestic skills required for ranch life. Patrick continued his work with the cattle and horses, but he found himself hurrying through his tasks so he could return to the house and spend time with Eleanor. They ate meals together, talking and laughing as they shared the events of their days. In the evenings, Patrick would read aloud from his small collection of books while Eleanor sewed or mended clothes. Sometimes they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, and Patrick would point out landmarks and tell stories about the land. Eleanor proved to be stronger than her initial sickness had suggested. She learned quickly, mastering the cranky wood stove and figuring out how to make bread that rose properly in the dry desert air. She befriended Maria, who came by twice a week to help with the heavier work, and the two women would chat in a mixture of English and Spanish that left both of them laughing. But it was the small moments that made Patrick's heart clench with growing love. The way Eleanor would bring him cool water when he was working in the heat, how she had taken to sitting in the barn while he worked with the horses, asking questions about their personalities and traits, the soft humming he would hear from the kitchen when she thought she was alone, the genuine joy on her face when she mastered some new skill. no matter how small. One evening, about 3 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, Patrick came in from a long day of riding fence lines to find the house transformed. Eleanor had somehow made curtains for the windows, simple but bright, and there were wildflowers in a jar on the table. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air, and she had even managed to bake a pie. "How did you do all this?" Patrick asked, looking around in amazement. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, looking pleased with herself. "Maria helped me with the curtains, and Carlos showed me where the wild plum trees grow for the pie filling. Do you like it?" "I love it," Patrick said honestly. "Eleanor, you have made this house into a home." I did not realize how much it was missing until now. She ducked her head, blushing prettily. "I wanted to show you that I can be a proper wife when the time comes. I know I started off so poorly, being sick and useless." Patrick crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "You need to stop saying that. You were never useless. And Eleanor, I need to tell you something. This arrangement of ours, it was supposed to be practical, but somewhere along the way, it became something more for me. I find myself thinking about you all the time. When something happens during the day, my first thought is that I want to tell you about it. When I wake up in the morning, I look forward to seeing you at breakfast. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I think I am falling in love with you." Eleanor's eyes widened, and for a moment Patrick feared he had spoken too soon, pushed too hard. But then her face broke into the most beautiful smile he had ever seen, and she squeezed his hands tightly. "I was so afraid you only saw me as a housekeeper," she whispered. "I have been falling in love with you too, Patrick. Every day a little more. The way you are so gentle with the animals, so patient with me when I make mistakes. How you listen when I talk, really listen, like what I have to say matters. I have never felt so valued, so seen as I do when I am with you." Patrick pulled her closer, his heart pounding. "Then maybe we should not wait. Maybe we should set a date for the wedding." "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Yes, I would like that very much." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in El Paso. Mrs. Chen came, along with Miguel and his whole family, and several of the ranch neighbors that Patrick did business with. Eleanor wore a dress she had altered from one of her Boston gowns, and Patrick wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and told Patrick he could kiss his bride, Patrick cupped Eleanor's face gently in his hands and kissed her with all the love that had been building inside him. She kissed him back just as fervently, her arms wrapping around his neck, and the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with Maria and some of the neighbor women helping to prepare a feast. There was dancing and music, with Carlos proving to be surprisingly skilled on the guitar. Patrick danced with Eleanor again and again, holding her close, marveling that this wonderful woman was now his wife. As the sun began to set and the guests started to depart, Patrick and Eleanor stood on the porch, waving goodbye and accepting final congratulations. When the last wagon pulled away and they were finally alone, Patrick turned to Eleanor and saw the nervousness in her eyes. "We can take this as slowly as you need," he said softly, taking her hand. "I will never pressure you, Eleanor. I want you to feel safe with me." Eleanor took a deep breath and then smiled, some of the nervousness fading. "I do feel safe with you, Patrick. That is what makes this different from what I feared marriage would be. I trust you, I love you, and I want to be your wife in every way." Patrick led her inside to their bedroom, the one he had given up for Eleanor but which they would now share. She had made it beautiful, with new linens and more of those simple curtains, and candles providing soft light. They came together with tenderness and growing passion, taking time to learn each other, to share this new intimacy that deepened the bond already forming between them. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor traced patterns on Patrick's chest with her fingers. "I never imagined it could be like that," she murmured. "The women back in Boston made it sound like something to be endured, not enjoyed." Patrick kissed the top of her head, holding her close. "With you, everything is better than I imagined. I feel like the luckiest man alive." The months that followed were filled with hard work, but also with happiness that seemed to grow stronger every day. Eleanor thrived in her new life, becoming skilled at all aspects of running the ranch household. She took over the garden completely, expanding it to include more vegetables and even some flowers. She learned to ride, tentatively at first but then with growing confidence, so she could accompany Patrick on some of his shorter trips around the ranch. They faced challenges together. A drought in late summer had them worrying about the cattle, and they spent long days hauling water from the creek to keep the herd hydrated. A pack of coyotes got into the chicken coop one night, and Eleanor cried over the losses even as she helped Patrick fortify the fencing. A bout of fever swept through the area in the fall, and both Patrick and Eleanor fell ill, nursing each other through the worst of it with the help of Miguel and Maria. But through it all, their love deepened and matured. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, figured out how to argue fairly when they disagreed, and always came back together stronger than before. Patrick found himself thinking less about the practical reasons he had sought a wife, and more about how empty his life had been before Eleanor arrived to fill it with laughter and love. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire wrapped in blankets against the unusual cold, Eleanor turned to Patrick with a special glow in her eyes. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Patrick felt his heart swell until it seemed too large for his chest. "A baby, truly?" Eleanor nodded, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I have suspected for a few weeks, but Maria confirmed it today. She said if I keep feeling well, the baby should come in late June or early July." Patrick pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents. Eleanor, you have made me so happy. I did not know it was possible to feel this much." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Eleanor suffering only mild sickness in the early months. Patrick became even more protective, trying to take over many of her tasks, but Eleanor insisted on maintaining her routine as much as possible. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she would remind him with exasperated affection. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work." But she did accept his help more often, and she glowed with happiness as her belly grew and they prepared for the baby's arrival. Patrick converted the second bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle from smooth wood and watching with amazement as Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets. In late June, on a hot afternoon when the air shimmered with heat, Eleanor's labor began. Maria came to help, along with a midwife from town that Patrick had arranged to have nearby. Patrick was banished to the porch with Miguel and Carlos, where he paced and worried through the long hours of labor. When he finally heard the cry of a baby, followed by Maria calling his name, Patrick rushed inside to find Eleanor propped up in bed, exhausted but radiantly happy, holding a tiny bundle. Maria was beaming as she stepped aside to let Patrick approach. "You have a son," Eleanor said softly, pulling back the blanket so Patrick could see the baby's scrunched face. "A healthy, perfect son." Patrick sat carefully on the edge of the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he looked at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and seemed to be staring around with unfocused interest at his new world. "He is beautiful," Patrick whispered, just like his mother. They named him Peter, after Patrick's father, with the middle name of James for Eleanor's father. Despite the difficult relationship Patrick had with his own father, he wanted to honor the man who had taught him everything about ranching and had, in his limited way, loved him. The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. They took turns walking the floor with Peter when he cried at night, marveling over every small milestone. Eleanor proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing, though she still insisted on maintaining the household and even helping with light ranch work when Peter was napping. Patrick had never imagined he could love anyone as much as he loved Eleanor, but watching her with their son added new dimensions to his feelings. She was so tender with Peter, singing to him in her clear voice, telling him stories even though he was too young to understand. And seeing his son's tiny hand wrapped around his finger made Patrick's heart ache with protective love. As Peter grew from an infant into a chubby, happy baby who could sit up and then crawl, the ranch prospered as well. A good season of rain meant healthy cattle and abundant crops in the garden. Patrick was able to hire another ranch hand, a young man named Thomas who had just arrived in Texas from Missouri and needed work. With extra help, Patrick found he had more time to spend with his family, and those hours became the most precious of his life. When Peter was 14 months old and toddling around on unsteady legs, Eleanor revealed that she was pregnant again. This time the announcement came with less surprise but equal joy. Their family was growing, their love was strong, and the future looked bright. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, was born on a cool spring morning when the desert was blooming with wildflowers. She had Eleanor's hazel eyes and a disposition that seemed calmer than her brother's had been. Peter was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking to hold her. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, allowing Patrick to build an addition onto the house to accommodate their expanding family. A third child arrived, another boy they named Daniel, who had his father's stubborn streak but his mother's warm heart. Eleanor became a pillar of the growing community around El Paso, organizing gatherings for the ranch families, helping with the church, and teaching several of the Mexican children to read and write in English. Patrick watched her with constant amazement, remembering the pale, seasick woman who had stumbled off the stagecoach all those years ago, and comparing her to this confident, capable woman, who had made such a full life in the harsh but beautiful land she had adopted. Through it all, their love remained the foundation everything else was built upon. They still made time for each other, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset and talking about their dreams and hopes. They argued sometimes, about money or child rearing or ranch decisions, but they always worked through it with honesty and respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Patrick took Eleanor on a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children with Miguel and Maria for 2 nights. They stayed in a hotel in San Antonio, eating in restaurants and walking the river like young courting couples. On the last evening, as they walked hand in hand through the plaza, Eleanor stopped and turned to face Patrick. "You remember when I first arrived?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I was so sick I could barely stand. I was terrified that I had made a terrible mistake, that you would regret sending for me." Patrick pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I remember thinking that I was the luckiest man in Texas, that somehow this amazing woman had agreed to take a chance on me. Every day since then has only proven that feeling right." "I love you, Patrick Kane," Eleanor said softly. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. Thank you for nursing me back to health that first week. Thank you for being patient while I learned to be a ranch wife. Thank you for giving me a home and a family and a love that makes every day an adventure." "I love you too, Eleanor," Patrick replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for answering my advertisement. Thank you for being brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. Thank you for making my house a home and my life complete." They kissed there in the plaza, oblivious to the people passing by, wrapped up in the magic of their love story that had started with such an unpromising beginning, but had grown into something more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream. As they returned to the ranch the next day, eager to see their children and get back to their life, Patrick reflected on how much had changed since that hot June day in 1878, when he had caught a pale, seasick woman in his arms. He had expected a practical arrangement, a partnership to help run his ranch. What he had found instead was a soulmate, a best friend, a passionate lover, and a wonderful mother to his children. The years continued to pass, marked by the normal rhythms of ranch life. They added more cattle to their herd, more horses to their corrals. The children grew and thrived, each developing their own personalities and interests. Peter showed a natural talent for working with the horses and spent hours with his father learning every aspect of training and care. Emma was quieter, more studious, spending her free time reading every book she could get her hands on. Daniel was the social one, making friends easily and always organizing games and adventures. When Peter was 15, Eleanor was surprised to discover she was pregnant again. She was 38 years old, and they had assumed their family was complete. But the new baby, another girl they named Sarah Ann, was welcomed with as much love as the others. She became the pet of the family, doted on by her older siblings and bringing new life and laughter to the household. Patrick and Eleanor aged together gracefully, their bodies showing the marks of hard work and the desert sun, but their love never dimming. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and the family they had built together. On warm summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were occupied with their own pursuits, Patrick and Eleanor would still sit on the porch as they had done for years. Sometimes they talked, sharing thoughts about the children or the ranch or memories of their years together. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors as it sank toward the horizon. One such evening, when Patrick was 50 and Eleanor was 47, she leaned her head on his shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Patrick asked, running his thumb over the back of her hand. "I was remembering that first week, when I was so sick at the boarding house and you stayed with me," Eleanor said. "I knew even then, in my fevered state, that you were someone special, that I was going to fall in love with you." Patrick smiled, pulling her closer. "I knew it too. I tried to tell myself it was just sympathy, just concern for someone who was ill. But the truth was, I was already halfway in love with you from your letters. Seeing you in person, even sick and pale, just sealed my fate." "We have had a good life together, have we not?" Eleanor asked, though it was not really a question. "The best life," Patrick confirmed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. You took a risk coming out here, Eleanor. You could have ended up with someone cruel or indifferent. I thank God every day that you ended up with me instead." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Eleanor said firmly. "No other life I would rather have lived. This ranch, this family, it is everything I dreamed of during those lonely years in Boston. More than I dreamed of, honestly." They sat together as darkness fell, and the stars began to appear in the vast desert sky. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their children, the familiar rhythms of their family life. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-maintained. a testament to their years of hard work and dedication. As they finally stood to go inside, Patrick pulled Eleanor into his arms for a long, sweet kiss. After more than 20 years of marriage, the touch of her lips still made his heart race. She was his partner, his love, his home, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would choose her again and again in every lifetime, in every circumstance. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Peter eventually took over more of the ranch operations, allowing Patrick to slow down a bit as his joints began to protest the hard work of his younger years. Emma became a teacher in El Paso, commuting back to the ranch on weekends. Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, working the ranch alongside his brother. And Sarah, the youngest, showed signs of becoming a skilled artist, filling sketchbooks with drawings of ranch life and desert landscapes. Patrick and Eleanor watched their children grow into capable, loving adults with pride and satisfaction. They had given them a stable home, a strong foundation of love, and the freedom to pursue their own dreams. And through it all, their marriage remained the anchor, the steady presence that held everything together. As Patrick approached 60, his hair now completely gray and his face deeply lined from years under the Texas sun, he looked back on his life with contentment. He had built something lasting, something meaningful. The ranch would continue after him, passed down to his children and their children. But more importantly, he had found love, real and true and enduring, with the woman who had arrived seasick and pale all those years ago. Eleanor, at 57, was still beautiful to Patrick's eyes. Her hair was streaked with silver, and her face showed the years, but her eyes still sparkled with intelligence and humor. Her hands, once soft from city life, were now work-worn but capable, able to tend a sick animal or comfort a crying grandchild with equal skill. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with all their children, and their growing families gathered at the ranch. Peter had married a sweet woman named Clara and had given them 2 grandchildren. Emma had married a fellow teacher, and they were expecting their first child. Daniel was courting a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread. Even Sarah, now 16, had a shy admirer among the boys in town. As Patrick looked around at the gathering on his porch and in his yard, at the generations his and Eleanor's love had created, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. This was what life was meant to be: family, love, hard work, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Patrick and Eleanor sat on their porch one more time. The moon was full, casting silver light across the desert landscape that had been their home for so long. 30 years, Eleanor mused, her hand in Patrick's. Where did the time go? Into living, Patrick replied. Into building this life together, raising our children, running the ranch, loving each other. Would you do it all again? Eleanor asked, turning to look at him. If you could go back to that day at the stagecoach station, would you still choose to send for a mail-order bride? Patrick met her eyes, seeing the love that still burned there after 3 decades. I would choose you, Eleanor, every single time, in this life and the next. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Eleanor leaned in to kiss him, and despite the years and the wrinkles and the gray hair, Patrick felt the same flutter in his chest that he had felt on their wedding day. Love, he had learned, did not fade with time. Real love, true love, only grew stronger, deepened, became more essential until it was as necessary as breathing. They sat together under the stars, these 2 people who had started as strangers brought together by a practical arrangement and had become so much more. The cowboy who had needed a wife to help run his ranch. The city woman who had needed escape from a suffocating life. They had found each other across the miles, and together They had built a love story that would last for all time. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scents of sage and dust and home. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the empty land. In the barn, one of the horses whinnied softly. These were the sounds of their life, the soundtrack to their love story, and Patrick knew he would never tire of hearing them. As they finally rose to go inside to bed, Patrick wrapped his arm around Eleanor's waist, holding her close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new moments to share. But tonight, he was simply grateful. Grateful for the mail-order bride who had arrived seasick and pale and frightened. Grateful for the courage it had taken her to travel across a country to marry a stranger. Grateful for every day they had shared since then, the good and the bad, the easy and the hard. Inside their bedroom, they prepared for sleep with the comfortable efficiency of long practice. As they settled into bed, Eleanor curled into Patrick's side, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart. "I love you," she whispered, as she had whispered countless times over the years. "I love you too," Patrick replied, as he had replied countless times and would reply countless more. Always and forever. They drifted off to sleep together, just as they had for 30 years, two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating their peaceful faces, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of the night. Their love story, which had begun with such uncertainty, had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. They had faced every challenge together, celebrated every victory together, and built a life rich with meaning and purpose. The mail-order bride and the cowboy had become something more than either had dreamed possible. They had become partners, lovers, best friends, and the center of each other's worlds. And as the years continued to flow forward, as their children grew and had children of their own, as the ranch prospered and changed with the times, that love remained constant. It was the foundation everything else was built upon, the unshakable truth at the center of their lives. Patrick had nursed Eleanor back to health in those first difficult days, giving her water and comfort and patience. But in return, she had healed something in him he had not even known was broken: the lonely, closed-off places in his heart that had never known real love or tenderness. She had taught him how to open up, how to trust, how to build a partnership based on mutual respect and affection. Together, they had created not just a family but a legacy. The ranch would continue for generations, but more importantly, the love they shared would echo through those generations. Their children had seen what true partnership looked like, what real love could be, and they would carry those lessons forward into their own lives. The story that had started with a seasick woman stumbling off a stagecoach and into a stranger's arms had become an epic of love and perseverance, of two people who had chosen each other against all odds and had made that choice work through dedication, patience, and unwavering commitment. As dawn broke over the desert the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Patrick woke to find Eleanor already awake, watching him with soft eyes. "Good morning," she said, reaching up to trace the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "I was just thinking how grateful I am to wake up next to you every day." "Good morning, my love," Patrick replied, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I am grateful for you too, every single day." They rose together to face another day of work and life and love. The cattle needed tending. The horses needed feeding. There were fences to mend and supplies to organize. But none of it felt like a burden because they faced it together, as they had faced everything for 30 years. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending frozen in time, but a living, breathing reality that continued to grow and change and deepen. It was work and struggle and triumph. It was laughter and tears and everything in between. It was real and messy and absolutely perfect. The mail-order bride and the cowboy, two people from different worlds who had found each other through chance and correspondence, had built a love that would stand the test of time. And as they walked out onto their porch to greet another Texas sunrise, hand in hand as they had walked for 3 decades, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Their love story was complete, but their love continued, as strong and true as the day they had first pledged themselves to each other. And that, Patrick thought as he pulled Eleanor close and kissed her in the golden morning light, was the only ending that mattered.